there's some empty seats in the front. Yeah. Anyone in the back or anyone can fill up the seats in the front, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Good evening and welcome to Big 18, Lost in Translation. Today, we will be the MC for the night. Let me introduce you to Vlad, our financial data analyst in AIP.
Thank you. And Paul, Business Intelligence Manager in AIP.
So Vlad, I have one question for you.
Yes.
Why do people come to Big?
Well, let's ask the audience.
Oh, sounds great.
Okay. So let's ask someone. Here. So what do you have to be?
Hello. I feel like it's a really good opportunity to meet new people, networking, and you learn a lot of interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What's your name? Hi. Why did you come to Big?
To experience new ideas and learn new things.
Interesting. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you for your great answers. So,
first of all, I would like to give a brief introduction to Asia Internship Program, or in short, AIP. We provide internship services across 8 destinations in Asia, with over 3,000 applicants to date. So what will be the agenda today?
So the agenda for tonight, there will be 2 parts. The first part will be the panel discussion. After that, there will be time for Q&A. The second and the final part of our event will be the networking with food and drinks. And now, I would like to acknowledge a sincere appreciation to our title sponsor, Rembrandt Hotel, who provides such a magnificent venue for our event since Big 11. And also, I would like to thank our supporters. They are Singapore Thai Chamber of Commerce, Work Venture, and European Association for Business and Commerce. Thank you.
I want to welcome Rembrandt Hotel Manager, Mr. Mikhail, onto the stage. Mr. Mikhail.
Okay. Maybe Mr. Mikhail will join us later. Okay. So now, let's go to the panel discussion. So let me please introduce you to a moderator of our panel. Please give a big hand to Miss Talia Andrews, a Managing Director for Q Consulting.
Sorry. You must excuse me, I had the flu today and I just had a complete brain overload. Okay, is that my instruction? Okay.
The stage is yours.
Welcome everyone and thank you for coming tonight to join our panel discussion on cultural diversity. I'd like to introduce now to the stage our distinguished speakers for tonight, our panelists. First up, I'd like to introduce Bingo, Headmaster of Duke Language. Next we have Tom, the Managing Director of TMF Group. Welcome to the stage, Tom. And then we have the very lovely Kate Jackson, Communication Director of An-dra-go-gy. I think I'm saying that correctly. And finally I have William, who's an international trainer and is part of Change Works. Hi, welcome to the stage. If you'll just grab your mics. So tonight I've prepared a few questions, however I'm going to throw the questions to the audience. So whenever you have a question or you feel the need to ask something or clarify something, please just put your hand up and we will answer your questions. So, lady, gentlemen, are you ready?
Of course.
Okay. So I'm just going to throw it out there. A man once told me, a very wise man, he said perception is reality. What then if your perception is cross-culturally different from someone else's reality?
Good question. I think what then happens is that people start talking to each other, but they never really understand each other, because they both perceive something as reality, and the other person says, but I have a different view on that reality. And ultimately, for each person, perception is what counts, not reality. It's their own reality, but it's not total reality.
Yeah, I think that Thomas Brady can start discussion and open up the means of communication. But let's think about it in real terms. Who here in the crowd has probably unfriended somebody on Facebook because of their political views or their views about anti-vaccinations or things like that? So we're living in a world where actually this happens more common. You know, the way that we disagree with each other. It could be cross-culturally, it could be male or female, and it could be across generations. But what we need to start doing, instead of cutting those channels of communication down, is maybe starting to have conversations and moving from social media to face-to-face discussion and making sure that we listen to each other and ask questions to get to know each other and learn about each other a little more so we can move forward.
Yeah, I think most of the time when people miscommunicate with each other, I think the intention is there. I think the intention is normally very positive. But because the misunderstanding comes from different cultural backgrounds and different assumptions and perceptions, that's where things go wrong. And I think, as Kate was saying, I agree with you. If you can have face-to-face meetings with people, when you can actually look each other in the eye, you will be able to overcome those hurdles a lot better, rather than through Facebook or Twitter or anything like that.
Yes. So what the other three said earlier is absolutely correct, and in fact, I've got nothing else to say now. Well, yes, that's true. But more than that, if you have to work with people from different cultures, people from different backgrounds, different beliefs or attitudes, then it's very counterproductive to not try and understand each other first before join hands and start to work together, for example. So if you don't try to break that barrier, then you're going to have a very unsuccessful work environment or just being each other in general. Really.
So I'm just going to touch on a point that Kate made, but before I do that, I'm going to ask the floor a question. Who here has had problems with cultural communication or cultural understanding in your workplace? Who's experienced it directly? To what extent, I'm going to go back here to the panelists, do people hide behind technology?
I think that technology is massive. If you look out here now, everybody has a mobile phone in their hand or close to hand, and I believe that I think that on average we all send about 100 text or WhatsApp line messages per day, and on top of email as well. And I think that it's now becoming a preferred channel of communication to not have a conversation, to avoid face-to-face. For example, I myself don't want to ring food delivery, I just use the Food Panda or Uber Eats app because I want to avoid that conversation sometimes. So I feel that if this is going on in our personal daily lives, then it's obviously going on in the workplace as well, and therefore it must be a barrier to effective communication between people.
Do people in our audience, have you experienced that, where staff members are hiding behind, whether they're Thai or expats, they're hiding behind emails and messages to communicate instead of coming and directly addressing an issue head on? Has anyone experienced that in their organisation? Is anyone guilty of doing it? So, Bingo, what do you think about that?
Well, yes, and well, the thing about technology and communication within, for example, in this instance, this workplace, you can also, technology also allows you to be ambiguous. as well. Like you can, for example, does anyone here speak Thai? Well, apart from Thai people, obviously. Okay. Yeah. Do you actually know when Thai people say "might been right," does that mean a yes or a no? So, well, without the face-to-face communication, then your conversation is very much sort of one-sided because it's not real time. You can't clarify, you can't verify what's actually being said. So, yes, that's a very good, how do I put it? A good mask, I suppose. It's a good mask to mask your intentions. Like, okay, I don't want to do this, but I don't want to be too obvious about it. So, yes.
So Tommy looked like he has something to say.
Yeah, no, I think when you talk about lost in translation, on one hand, it's cultural. On the other hand, it's exactly what it says. It's lost in its language. So when we are either forced or we do it ourselves, for example, emailing a company, if English is the language that needs to be written in the email, everybody that's not a native English speaker is at a disadvantage. Because even if they're not masking behind it, even if they have the right intention to say exactly something very specific, if they don't master the language, they're not capable of doing that. It leads to all sorts of misunderstandings. And as Bingo said, if you are face to face, you can tell by body language, oh wait a minute, that didn't come across correctly. As far as I know, with email, there's no body language. So it creates massive inefficiencies. And it creates discussions that dwell off into an area where it's not even necessary. Because language sometimes is an obstacle. And with email or WhatsApp or whatever, that becomes a big, big issue. And it seems like we're doing more and more with email and WhatsApp. And so that issue just keeps increasing and increasing.
So, William, you've been listening to all this. What are your thoughts? And how do you think this affects an organization? And how does management go about in rectifying this?
Well, I really agree with Tom here as well. Because the email and social media, people tend to, be very lazy and just like something or not like it. It becomes very black and white. And people use emoticons and they use abbreviations. So a lot get lost in translation because people misread. Meanings and definitions, they're not understood anymore. And again, we're coming back to face-to-face, because what it's all about is when you communicate with each other is that you show your intentions, that you respect people. I think if you can show people that you respect the other person, you are already halfway. And with email or social media or Facebook, you can't do that. You can show that you like something or you don't like something, but that's about it. The nuances get lost completely.
And irrespective of language, whether you're having a conversation using broken English or broken Thai, one of the skills that we need to start developing is the art of communication and the art of the conversation. So it is avoiding the email when you can pick up the phone. In fact, one of my clients has brought me in to do some work with that to try and encourage members of their team to, make sure that it's either a Skype or a phone call rather than an email. And to even, if you're being the present, so if somebody walks into your office or walks into the pantry and you happen to have a chit chat with them, it's like putting that phone away, closing your laptop for just 5 minutes and showing that you're there to listen to what's being said, because we've all had one of those conversations where we feel that we're being understood and that makes us feel good. So therefore we obviously increase engagement in the workplace through that as well.
So just to go back to what Bingo was saying about ambiguity in language, I'll just go back to the audience here and ask, how often have you experienced with your Thai staff when you ask them a question, a yes or no question, and they say cup or cup? And what do you understand of their answer? Anyone? Does it do you take that as a yes or a no, or I acknowledge, I hear you? What do you take from that? Because as a Thai person, this is something that's baffled me. Yes, you were going to say.
I was going to say something. Thank you. My name is Belkis Shah from England. I'm very happy to be here, by the way. All that I've heard so far, it's very positive because you're bringing the human factor back into focus. And lost in translation is more like mental communication, and one can hide behind it, as you said, the mask, and one can misunderstand and not question, and you don't grow that way. So what affected me as I was listening to you, a picture of children came to my mind. Let's say a child from Africa, a child from China, a child from east, west, north, south, different colors. If you put them together, they are going by their heart, not any lost in translation, because their skills are not developed yet. And they have fun together. We have lost that. And we're in a very critical position of self-destruction. Suicide is higher than ever. Depression is higher than ever. I mean, you just have to look at the society now. We're at the verge of many devastating things. So I'm very, very happy, especially because you have a mixed panel, Thai as well as Westerners. The East is looking at the West thinking, you know better. And I've grown up in both society. And West is looking at the East thinking they know better. But in this case, you're bringing the two cultures together and you're saying, we don't have to be lost in translation. Let's bring the heart communication, feeling, talking to each other. A mother told me recently, my children don't even talk to me, they text me. I'm glad that I wasn't born at this time and age, tell you the truth. So we need to align ourselves or come back to being human. So yes, when people say ka or what's the other word? Cup, it's like they're hiding again. They're not really afraid. There's a lot of fear. Why are people not even sitting in the front? Because they're afraid. I'm not saying you shouldn't be. You're not sure, that's all. Again, lost in assumption, which is also lost in translation.
So the interesting point that's just being made here, another interesting point that I think has just been made here that I can observe is that it's not just cultural loss in translation, it's generational loss in translation. In your experience, have you seen that across your companies? And if so, I'll be controversial here and say, what are some of the stereotypical behaviors and how damaging is it, or how good is it towards the company performance?
Well, to start with the last, it's very damaging. And yes, I've seen it in my own company. So I've been in Thailand for 3 years, and after a few months I thought to myself, this is different. There was a lot of lost in translation. But at a certain point I came to the realization that actually a lot of it has nothing to do with Thai cultural issues. It's just the fact that 40% of the people that work in my office are below 25 or below 30. So in other words, the millennials. And as you can see, I'm not a millennial. So there's a generational issue there. But at first I thought, it must be a Thai thing. It has nothing to do with, it's a generational thing. And yes, it's very damaging because we don't understand each other. I don't understand the people that work in my office, and they most likely don't understand me either. And we're both there to do the same thing, and that's to grow the company and to reach the same objective and to be happy in our work and our lives. So if we're not communicating, something's going wrong. But it's definitely not always a generation, a cultural thing. It's a lot of times, it's just generations. They change. I mean, I'm different than my parents. Generational thing.
So can you do a lot of training in this area? What would be some tips for you?
Well, I'm going to change it to focus to Bingo, because he's Thai as well, and he's in the language business. So if you are presenting a question to a member of staff and their response was cap or cap, what kind of question would that be? What kind of question?
Well, first of all, it has something that involves commitment. And for example, can you do this? Can you finish this with something?
Do you, can you, are you? They're all closed questions. So start by open questions: who, what, when, where, how, and then you will avoid the either can or can.
What about if you're asking someone out for dinner?
I'd ask.
Skip that one. That's the one that we notice the most. So when we ask our staff, can you come join us for dinner on Saturday night? They say ha, and we know, okay, for sure that's a no. But how do you ask that in another way? I don't know how to do that.
So can we just make sure what context we're in? This is professional, not personal.
Professional.
I would state the purpose, the objective, the reason behind it first, and back yourself up with 3 reasons. That, you know, the power of 3 always helps. Give 3 facts to support your proposal for that incentive dinner, that meeting, that team building event, and make sure that the person knows the reason behind it.
I'm going to have to practice that. What about you, Lynn? What do you think?
Well, talking about questions, I think that's a really interesting point, because yes, a lot of people tend to ask a lot of closed questions, and it's all about open questions, but I think also you need to think about what kind of questions. Do you look at the problem, you ask questions about the problem, or you ask questions about the solution? Is it a problem-based question or a solution-focused question? And to give you an example, if you have somebody come to work late all the time, and you ask them, why are you coming late all the time? Right? What do you think that person feels? He's being put on the spot. He feels he's being attacked, and you're blaming him. Right? Sometimes the why question is necessary, but instead of asking why, how about just asking, okay, what can we do for you to come on time in the future? So what you do is you change completely the focus. Rather than on the problem, you focus on the solution, and you help people to open up and look at possibilities rather than blame. So
I think it's very much it's a two-way street, right? So anywhere where there's lost in translation, be it cultural, generational, the way you ask a question, there's always 2 sides of it. There's always 2 people. Luckily, there's still usually 2 people communicating. So it's both sides need to think, and how can I do this better? And I would always try not to be controversial, but I sometimes get the feeling that non-Thai think, here I go again, it's a Thai thing. Well, even if it is, who cares? Solve it. You're in the middle of it. Get it done. And you know, sit down together. It's a two-way street. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe it's not a Thai thing. Maybe it's a Farang thing. You know, turn it around. So in that sense, I think there's it gets very quickly into a blame game, which is a game where everybody loses and nobody wins.
But to go back to, you were talking about the millennials. They have a very different DNA, I guess, than other age groups, and they have certain patterns that are very good, and certain patterns that are sort of limiting their performance in some way, somehow. How do you motivate them to understand the other side? Because I think that's the most difficult, for me, it's the most difficult generation to work and manage with because their expectations are so different.
Yeah, well, first of all, they tend to disagree with your assumption that they're doing it the wrong way. So that's the first thing you'll have to realize. But I think they're driven by different things that maybe you and I would be, and they need more explanation on why are we doing something like that. And as soon as you give them a good reason, and those reasons don't necessarily have to be any different than the reasons that we tell ourselves to do it, but you need to explain it, because for us it's very obvious. For them, it's not obvious. But if you explain it to them, a lot of times they say, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. So they need to understand why, and I think they also have to have, talking about perception, at least the perception that they're part of the process. That might not be the reality, but if they don't have at least the perception, then it's never going to happen.
What do you think?
No, absolutely, I agree with that. And also what I think they need a lot more appreciation. They need to feel appreciated a lot more than older generations. I think you need to tell them a lot more how good their work is, and you know how much they're contributing to the company. I think they really need that a lot more than any generation prior.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I'm just thinking that the majority of the millennials that I've worked with are actually from kind of very low levels, low literacy backgrounds, low educational backgrounds, and they just, reiterating what Tom said, they actually like to be given a reason to learn, to be given the tools and skills and pieces of a jigsaw that they can put together so they can feel that they're actually growing in terms of personal and professional development. And even though we could have MBA graduates or PhD students or people who haven't really finished primary school or secondary school, they're all coming from the same point of view. And you know, that we're also competing with Google, they want answers fast. So if we can provide them with the tools and skills to learn, they can do it themselves.
So Bingo, I think you're the only millennial on this panel, right? What are your thoughts?
Well, I know it's probably not a good question to ask me because, well, it's very difficult to look at yourself, you know, impartially, right? But what I can tell you about, well, what Thai people, well, in my generations, because at our school, the teachers are sort of my age, they are younger than me. But actually, what Willem said earlier about appreciation, that's actually spot on. Because actually, prior to this discussion, I prepared a little bit. I talked to my staff about this theory. So, well, one of the two things that they said they want from an organization or from a company or from their boss is appreciation. It doesn't mean that, you know, they have to be infantilized. They have to be, you know, they have to have their hands held and then just walk through things and, you know, give, you know, they don't need to be given, you know, empty phrases, but you need to understand that, you know, that they are struggling doing what they do as well as the bosses do, you know, because sometimes that can be overlooked. You know, when the bosses like see their subordinates and think they're not working enough, but actually in their own position, they think they're already giving their best. So they need to be acknowledged that. That's actually the only thing I think that my teachers, all of them agreed on. Like they need to be told when they're doing well, when they're doing fine, not only just when they make mistakes. And actually that's one of the main reasons that someone would choose to work or quit a job is they need to be acknowledged. It's very important.
And it can be done in any language. Can be done in any language.
Yes. You're very good.
I'm just going to go on to the next point, and I'm going to talk about stereotypes. And we discussed in our original lunch that stereotypes are just that, they're stereotypes, but some stereotypes are stronger than other stereotypes. And so I want to go to the issue of Graham J. In our audience here, who is aware of Graham J? Ingo, do you want to explain what Graham J is?
Okay. Actually, there's a whole lesson about this at our school. Like, you know, we study one full day about this concept. So, well, Graham J, if you translate it literally, Graham means to be afraid, to be intimidated. That's Graham. And Jai, a lot of you already know what it is. What is it? Yes, that's right. So a fearful heart, a heart that is intimidated. So the concept of Graham J is, well, fundamentally, it's to keep its harmony, because that's what Thai society is built upon. Like, you know, being together in peace and without, or as less as possible, of conflicts. So Graham J is the concept that people try to use in order to keep that peace and that harmony. So, well, I mean, if you look at the surface level, you might think like, oh, I Graham J you Graham J me. It's something to do with ranks, with the hierarchy. Well, that's true as well, but you know, fundamentally is basically the concept that basically in Thai society, to the minds of Thai people, it's a concept that allows Thai people to keep that equilibrium, just so that so not to harm it, not to disturb it.
Just to add to your point, I think has anyone ever experienced going to a meeting and and nothing gets decided at the meeting. You discuss and you talk and you discuss, and nothing happens at the meeting. And you are thinking, okay, why didn't anyone want to say anything? In part, in my experience, that has been very J, because people, especially people who you work with who are, I don't know what's the politically correct word, subordinates or your staff, don't necessarily want to tell you when there's something wrong or when they don't agree with you. So that's very J. So to what extent does this damage company performance and team culture?
I can answer that one. So, what I'm telling you is, so my company deals for 99% with international clients, and we market ourselves as a premium company. So our fees are quite high, which our clients are prepared to pay, but they do expect a certain amount of proactivity and actually telling them if they say, so we're going left, and they say, no, that's not the right, we need to go to the right. But this concept interferes with providing that service to our clients, because if the client says we're going left, my staff have a tendency to think, oops, that's not what we need to do, but they say, yeah, that's what we're doing. So ultimately, we end up in a place where nobody wants to be, and the client is usually angry, which, by the way, even the situation escalates after that. It doesn't get any better. So it's difficult to deal with, but there are many ways around it. For example, I always tell my staff, basically, you keep the relationship with the client, you keep the harmony, but if there's an issue, you don't have to present it to the client. Tell me, because I love screaming at people. So, if you want me to scream with the client, it's fine with me, I don't care. So there's many ways around it. The only essential part is they do have to be willing to tell me that there's an issue. Right? So that doesn't always work, but it's my job to put them in a situation where they trust me enough that they will tell me something is going terribly wrong. Someone needs to scream at the client, but I'll do it. I really have no issues with that. But if I don't know, I can't tell neither of them. So it can be very disruptive in a relationship with our clients, and ultimately the client pays our salary.
What do you think?
Well, looking at the solution, really, I think one way of overcoming these situations is to actually, as you said earlier, is trust. You really need to create a sense of safety for people at the office. If they feel that you judge them, or they feel that they can't open up to you, they will not come to you. They will not tell you what's going on. So I think it's really important to show that you care about them, because by caring about people, you build trust. You show that you respect them. And some of the things you can do, for example, in meetings, rather than going straight onto the task and talking about the objectives and the figures, make it a little bit more about the person rather than about the task. Right? See people in the office more like people rather than colleagues. Try to really understand where people are coming from, their background, what is going on with their families. Things like that I think is really important, especially for Thai people, because this is their culture, and if you try to understand where they're coming from, they feel like, oh, he understands us, he understands our culture, and they will open up to you, and I think that is one way of really breaking down that barrier.
So Kate, you've got a lot of experience in this field. How do you cultivate trust in an organisation between different cultures and different levels and different generations?
Okay, well, it's not really, trust is large. It's a large scale issue. If you have a fast-paced, large company with lots of generations of staff, it's very difficult to do. But this is something that also came up in our chemistry check discussion, and it's also looking at your HR processes, maybe your internal communications, your recruitment and onboarding, making sure that your brand is there, that your culture is there. We all now work in very international companies. They're not strictly Thai or Western or American anymore, you know, they're very international. So going into your meeting and even just talking about culture and what's expected of your staff and how you would like to see the staff behave when they grow competencies, is just focusing more on communicating the brand and what the brand is about and the core values and the mission statements, and maybe tying behaviours to those and just communicating it as a picture rather than looking on individual people and individual trust issues.
That's very good points. You know, original lunch meeting we talked about how some Thai people are very uncomfortable with public recognition, and my question is in getting people's confidence, and especially Thai people's confidence, and especially we talked about there is a gap between those who've worked overseas and those who haven't. How do you build that kind of motivation within the Thai workplace, allowing people to receive the recognition publicly, and because we talked about some Thai people have a fear, a stigma that others will try to cut them down, and I see that quite often in the workplace. How do we cultivate a better sense of being able to receive recognition in the workplace within the Thai staff?
I think there's several tricks. The first one being always make sure there's food. That really helps. Second of all, try to focus less on the individual, but make it a team thing. So award teams, not people specifically. A whole group of people, a client team, or whatever. I think that's very important. And I think the mistake that's made a lot is coming back to what Kate said, is that don't begin first with what you're trying to achieve and why, and then later make a link to the numbers, because ultimately, if you're a commercial organization, you're there to earn money. So my boss is always asking me about the numbers. It's always interested in. So in the beginning, I had a tendency to start with the numbers and then explain either why we did get there or why we didn't get there. But first, it's much better to start with how did we get there and why did we get there? Why are we trying to get there? And eventually bring down to the numbers, because it's so some people make the conclusion that subordinates, by lack of a better word for the moment, are not interested in numbers. That's not true at all. They're very interested in the numbers. As a matter of fact, they're very interested to figure out how they've contributed to the numbers. But they want to talk about the contribution first and then the numbers, instead of turning it around. So I think that's also very important.
Bingo, you're Thai. What are your thoughts?
About public recognition, praises, and things like that. Well, actually, I also had this discussion with my teacher, so thank God I did. Is that, well, I mean, of course, you know, people in workplace, in organization, they all contribute like differently, because you know some people are more bright, they're brighter than others, or you know more talented than others. But you know, if you're going to praise or you know like give recognition to people who basically excel all the time and neglect the others, then you're gonna, back to what I said before, you're gonna destroy or disrupt that harmony that I was talking about earlier. So, well, in the mind of Thai people, like contribution is contribution. It's okay. Some people might be able to do this amount of work, or you know, can do this, you know, well. But you need to, well, like Tom said before, it needs to be thought of as a group effort as well as individually. But for the individual level, then what you can do in order to not ruin that equilibrium in workplace is by, if someone seems to be very good at everything, or, you know, so you can maybe just pull them aside and then you know compliment them in private as well as in public, but just make sure that these compliments or these recognitions are sort of averaged out evenly. And even if you want to make an extra effort to to appreciate someone, then make sure that the access goes in private. This is what I think.
It's very interesting, and I would agree with you. I'm going to go on to another stereotype and another challenge I face in my own office, which is understanding of time between cultures. Has anyone experienced a difference of understanding of time when work starts at 9 o'clock? What does that mean for different cultures? Has anyone experienced let's have some thoughts.
Well, I'm British, so I get anxious if I'm like less than 30 minutes early. Okay, so again, I think it differs throughout nationalities even as well. So I like to be really, really early. But I think I've been here a long time now, so I'm becoming a little bit more Thai, especially with my Thai staff and my colleagues. I give them a grace period of 15 minutes, but at the same time, I'm not their boss. So I know that it differs across nationalities, but I don't know of any specific techniques so far that has worked, because we would know them.
Really, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a really tough one, actually. I have to admit. I think one of the things you can do is really try to explain to your members of staff, to your team, what the consequences are of being late. What is the impact on their work, but not only on their working on the task, but also link it back to the person again. So if we are submitting this report late to our client, I look back at that as the manager, right? Because the loyalty with the Thais most of the time is not with the company, it's with the manager. So the manager is the most important part of their team. So a lot of times you see also that when a manager leaves the company, a lot of their team members leave along with them. Right? The loyalty is towards the manager. So if you have a really good relationship with that person or with your team, you can actually link time and planning to yourself and explain them the impact it can have on you. And if they're loyal, they will make sure you don't want. Because if you're late with the report, it means that you as the manager lose face, and then you have harmony is all to shambles, right? So.
Tom, you would have experienced this.
No, I completely agree. I think one of the tricks, if you may call it that, is to first of all, it's not an individual thing. Make it a group thing and tell them that if someone comes late and therefore they can't pick up the phone with the client's call, who thinks it's office hours, they might complain to my boss. It means my boss is going to call me, is going to be angry at me. So make the connection in the sense of, we need to do this together, and bring a little bit of losing face into it, and say, we have to make sure my boss doesn't get angry at me. But I also want to make another comment on that, so in my experience, and this, once again, it has nothing to do with Thailand, is that it's usually the same 10 people that are always late. And that's everywhere I've worked. It's always the same 10. It's not that sure, there's exceptions, somebody once every month comes a bit, but it's usually the same group of people that are always late. And that usually means that something is the matter. It's either because they're coming from 5 hours away, or there's issues at home. Not always, sometimes they're just always late. But it really pays off to ask them, what's the reason why you're always coming late? Sometimes you get a whole story, but it's usually always the same people. So, and that's been in every country where I've worked.
And then once you found out their story, what do you do?
You try to help them, you try to manage them, you try to give them a solution. Imagine you have an issue in your personal life, you've been coming late for 6 months. How much tunnel vision do you think you're in at that moment? Do you think you're capable of stepping outside of that, looking at your situation, thinking, oh, I hadn't thought of that. So maybe someone who sees it from a fresh point of view could say, have you ever thought of doing it that way? Or have you ever thought of saying this to that person or whatever? Sometimes it helps. It doesn't always help. Sometimes it does.
Ingo, I'm going to ask you a different question. question. I'm going to ask you because you're Thai. How flexible do you think is the Thai understanding of time?
How difficult is the Thai understanding?
Flexible. How flexible?
How flexible? Oof. Okay. Can you go back and ask that question? This might be easier. Flexibility of time. Okay. Well, I mean, if it's your personal life, then I believe that's case by case. It depends on your relationship with the person. For example, your the other significant part, or with your parents, or But I think in workplace, in terms of flexibility of time, as in coming to work late and such, in a Thai's mind, there's always often there's a justification for them being late, such as the traffic is bad today, it's not my fault, it's the traffic's fault. Or the MRT station is crowded today, couldn't get in until 20 minutes later. There's always a justification in their mind, and in their own mind, they're not wrong. And this is a bit controversial, I know, but bear with me. I'm getting too much fun. But, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that their justification is right? So, the question is the flexibility. Yes, so the flexibility of time in Thai's mind depends on their justification of why they should or shouldn't be on time. So, as in, how much effort they should put in to to try to make an effort to be on time. So, one way to counteract that is actually what William said before, spot on, about making it more personal. Rather than doing it for the company, doing it for me, for your boss. If you're a boss to Thai people, like it or not, you enter some kind of relationship with them. You are their family now. So making it personal, because again, as I talked to my teachers, they said that they are willing to make an effort. They're willing to change, to do things for their boss, for someone who they work for personally, than working for an organization, which is an abstract concept, right? So, well, if you make it clear to them that if they're late, it reflects bad on you as their boss, or it disappoints you personally, then if they like you, if they trust you, then that goes beyond regulation. That goes beyond goes beyond rules. That goes beyond companies' regulations. So make it personal to them. That reflects badly to them. That should help basically counteracting their justification of the flexibility of time.
I think it's in a very, very, very gentle way. You need to make clear that they're basically showing lack of respect for the rest of their colleagues. And if you extend that into the fact that we want to be a family, basically you're showing lack of respect to your family. Sometimes that gets the point across, but you have to be, don't be too aggressive in the way you put that forward, but that's a concept I think a lot of people understand.
So we're about to wrap up and go into the Q&A, so I just want to get some final thoughts from Willem and Kate about if there's any one takeaway about cultural understanding and cultural confusion or understanding, what would it be?
I think it's too easy for us to all stereotype and put people in boxes in terms of language ability, cultural differences. And I feel that overall we need to start opening up channels of conversations. And having conversations, that means asking questions and listening, and not just giving your ideas and telling people what needs to be done.
I think we can learn a lot from us foreigners, Westerners. I think we can learn a lot from the Thai culture, Asian culture. I think what we should really think about is relationships first and task next. Again, I said this earlier, and I'm not saying that the figures and the task and the objectives are not important. I'm just saying that we should think about the relationship first Because if we don't, and we keep looking at the task and the figures, we actually run into walls. We actually go against eventually our goals, because we're not going to get there if we don't have the relationship. I think it's really important that we have the relationship first, then we look at the objectives.
Some very good points there. Do I have time to take questions from the floor? Yes, okay. I'd like to take some questions from the audience. Yes.
Bingo, I have a question for you about equilibrium in the workplace.
Okay.
So you mentioned it twice, not to disrupt the harmony or the equilibrium. I can't really picture what an equilibrium in the workplace looks like. So what is the closest thing?
I suppose the closest thing to that would be family. When you work at the company, especially when you're in your older generations, like older Thai, what they want from being in a company is that they just want to feel at home, at ease. I know that in the West, it's people are very good at compartmentalizing, between their personal life and their professional life. But in Thailand, often these two, it's really the division is very hazy, because for a lot of people, being at a company it has to be like being in your family, because actually you spend 8 or more hours a day being with these people. You spend more time with your colleagues, with your bosses, than you spend with your real family. So in order for Thai people to basically to feel at ease enough to be somewhat to be at at an organization, they have to feel like they're working with their brothers and sisters, parents, aunts. It doesn't mean that you have to treat them the same way that their parents would do, but first of all, it has to be an environment where people doesn't feel like if they can't meet their they can't meet their ends, they can't meet their deadlines, that there's no there's no way that they can get out of it. There's no reasons in the world that they can give to their boss to make him or her understand that situation. So basically, it has to be an environment where people are willing to listen, as a parent would listen to their kids, or as a brother or sister listen to their siblings. So, yes.
Thank you. That was a very interesting question, and that was quite insightful. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. This is for the entire panel, I guess, if anybody wants to answer it. So it's kind of apparent from what everyone's been saying that key point indicators of international companies are based on values that are very different than Thai values. So do you try to change the values of the Thai people who are working for you? Or do you try to adjust the way you manage according to Thai values? Or do you ignore the values of the company?
It's a very interesting question. Tom, I think.
Well, it's an illusion to think, and actually, to be honest, a bit disrespectful to think you could change a whole group of people just because you feel it needs to be done differently. Having said that, if people choose to work for an international company, you do tend, especially if it's a bigger company, we have all these beautiful mission statements and values, and they're hanging everywhere on the wall, and they're there for a reason. So it is important that people are aware. No, you can't change them, but you can help them adapt. And by the way, you yourself need to adapt as well. I think I said earlier, it's always a two-way street. So if you both get a bit closer to each other, you can usually find a space where everybody is more or less happy anyway. And yes, there's going to be some conflicts every once in a while, but that's fine. That's all part of. I would always say that's part of being in a family, right? It's not like a family is always harmonious all day long. So it's part of the game. But it's an illusion to think that you'll step in and within 3 weeks everybody will be singing a different tune. That's never going to happen.
Yeah, and I think it was your second point that in reinforce here that you can't change it, so we're stuck in thinking of another solution. And this reiterates what Willem said in terms of it's about building those relationships. And I've been here and done so well because I kind of make an effort to get on with the people that I'm working with, to have a laugh, to have a joke, to really kind of make sure that even though there is hierarchy systems here, more in play in Asia than there are in the West, that I'm their friend as well as their advisor, their manager. So to make sure that we get on a personal level. So I know a little bit about everyone I work with. I know their marital status, their children, where they live, what they like to eat for lunch, and just kind of really build a relationship with people so that we can keep having a shared vision and a shared goal that brings them all together.
Yeah, I think it's really important when you're actually doing the recruitment process that you communicate the values of the company. It's about managing expectations. And if these people don't match your values, then they're just not going to be part of the team. So I think, but you can find these people. They're definitely there around. So it's all about the start, the beginning, where you manage people's expectations.
Well, I mean, about values. Should you change your values? Should they change their value? Well, as I said before about the harmony and equilibrium. Well, obviously, when you come from like different sort of cultures, then you have different mindsets, and ultimately you have different ultimate goal in life, where you want to get to in your life. Like in the West, a bit of a generalization here. It's very individualistic. Like you want sort of personal achievement. You want to go high. You want to be successful. But in Thailand, that's not the goal of Thai people. That's the goal of Thai people is to basically just go slowly, but with each other. So if what they hope for from life is different, then you can't really, expect them to, change their value when what they want from life is completely different. However, what can sort of circumvent that is building personal relationships, and because that transcends any culture, any mindset. So say if you're from like two different cultures, but you like each other, you want to be around each other, you're comfortable around each other, then those values, they kind of just start to disappear. You will want to make each other sort of happy or content than trying to change your values per se.
Sounds a bit like getting married, doesn't it? So I'll take 2 more questions. I've got this gentleman here. I'll take 3 more questions. This gentleman here, then this gentleman, and then this gentleman here.
Well, I'll make it short. Well, firstly, thank you all of you for sharing your insight and thoughts today. I have a question about the topic of franchise we discussed today, and also about what you mentioned, Tom. Working in consultancy where you have to be able to tell clients off if they don't do this with Thai employees. That's also a problem we are having and I'm having. And the solution you have mentioned is that they should be able to tell you, and you then take care of it for them. I surely see the solution there, but in my understanding it's more of a short-term solution, meaning they will always be reliable on you being there for them. You take the responsibility of them as well, which is in many cases can be a step back. You try to educate and encourage them to do it themselves. A question to all of you, have you found good ways and maybe baby steps on how to bring the concept of being able to mention your own opinion and the company's opinion to a client, even though it might not be very welcomed by the client in the first place?
Yeah, I two solutions for this. The first is on a more of a personal way of managing. So if you're working with your team or you're working with people around you, there's the comeback, my An-dra-go-gy, you know, you're basically saying don't be like that, but kind of making it a little bit informal, making a laugh and a joke about it, and making sure that you're trying to say that you're willing to build a team and work together to get through this issue. The second one is, again, irrespective of language. I have a client who makes reports, and you know they're a consultancy firm and they want to put in a report which goes against their client's needs. So I've been putting in templates and use so their reports are more persuasive. So it's giving them the skills as well, the workplace skills, which support the work that they're doing. So persuasion can be taught in any language, it just follows a standard or a template. So if they have their ideas, it doesn't mean that they have to go in and knock on their client's door and give a presentation and tell them what they should be doing, but it's about giving them tools that they can put into use in their daily lives to support that movement going forward.
Yeah, I think also it comes down to appreciation again, because rather than, for example, if you give someone an assignment and rather than telling them, like, look, I want you to do this, how about putting it around and say, hey, I need your help. I need your help. I really need your help for you to contribute to this project, right? So it makes people feel they're needed. You show people appreciation, and also rather than giving a big chunk, maybe you want to chop it up a little bit. Maybe chop it up and into smaller parts. So not giving all that responsibility at once, but give it a little bit by bit by bit. A lot of times, people feel responsibility is a burden. They see it as a negative thing rather than something that empowers them. So you need to go very gradually with that. Otherwise, people will shut down, they won't take responsibility, and you've got problems.
Inga, before you answer, I'm just going to address the question. See, I think that it can be incredibly damaging to an organization if you don't do like some of the things that, as Kate suggested. And where you see this most is in the accounting departments. So if you have debt and your people are too brain to collect the debt, then you have a serious problem. So I think it's a very important question and something to be considered very carefully in organizations.
Okay, baby steps for getting past this brain giant. Do you want to answer first?
Just to, you mentioned that I said I would do the screening. There's two ways of doing that. You can do that one-on-one with your client, or you can ask your colleagues that are part of the team or part of the conversation to join you there, and preferably they're on the call that nobody knows they're on the call, and they can watch it happening in front of them, and that way you show them how it works, because here once again there's nothing specific tied. If you have people working for you that don't know how to do something, if you don't give them the tools, they're never going to get there, right? It has nothing to do with timeless or anything. So in other words, involve them in the process, and a lot of times, so we had a client where the CEO would blow up about 5 times per meeting, and at a certain point I knew this was going to happen. So, and I would have my head of accounting with me, and she would completely shut down after the first word. She'd start staring at the ground, nothing would happen, which made the CEO even angrier, which was actually quite funny. So before the meeting starts, tell them, so this is the message we're going to be giving them. They're not going to be happy, but so she's going to blow up. But remember, in 2 minutes she will completely have forgotten that she blew up, and she'll just go on with whatever she was doing. So I said, watch for it, it's going to happen. And exactly that's what happened. And after she said, oh, wow, that was interesting, because she had never seen that before, because she would be looking down. So it's involving them in the process. So yes, it's a short-term solution, I agree with you, but ultimately, give them the chance to develop those tools, and eventually they'll get there themselves.
Well, basically, if you feel like you have a need to get the job done, but brain giant is in the way, then first of all, make sure that you make it clear to them that you're on their side, like, this client's like this, and this is not going to be. I'm not happy to, but we have to get this. Have to get through this. So make sure you're on their side, and if possible, if you're the kind of person who who's good at handling conflicts or standoffs situations, then maybe try to sort of relieve them of responsibility just for the time being. Like say, okay, you go and do this, maybe set them a guideline, this is something you can say, you can do to the client, and if something happens, it's on me, If you're able to do that, if you're able to handle that yourself, then the short-term solution will be get the responsibility out there first, because responsibility is a burden, and especially if it's a kind of responsibility that has a ramification to the company's interest. So Thai people don't really feel like, they generally are not well equipped with the with handling stress anyway. So if it has dire consequences, then that's going to be a big no-no. So if you can, alleviate that the stress of the fear of responsibility, do it first. Good on you.
Gentleman in the back. A question? Give the man a microphone.
No, I'm losing my voice. First observation, I was late tonight, but I've been here a little while, and the biggest challenge for us is the younger generation, and we're talking about the X and the Ys and the millennials, etc. And they are creating a whole new question about how we deal with the way we were brought up. Some of us, I'm the oldest here, I can say that. And we in our company are trying to work out how we manage and how we work with those people. And it's not about being better or less, it's just something about the future that we're all in. Observation 1. Observation 2, which is probably a little bit more controversial, is you talk about tasks, you talk about relationships, and you talk about values. I understand tasks, and so do the Texan family. They also understand relationships very well. But my question is, in this country, is we talk about values, but do we really understand them, and do we live by them? And I think that's the most important thing for this country, is to stand up with the values that are important for all Thai people.
Thank you for those observations. The last question for you, sir.
In the panel's view, what is the most common mistake that Thais make as cultural differences, and what is the most common mistake that Parans make against Thai culture? And how would you go about solving that problem?
I will be controversial and answer first, even though I'm not part of the panel, but I will open the way. I think for foreigners, we work with quite a few Australians, and sometimes when Australians come into our office, they fly in, they fly out, they haven't necessarily studied the culture, and they're quite blunt in a way that is really not easy for a Thai person to necessarily process. On the other hand, Thai people can be also very blunt. I quite often, 3 times a week, I think I have my staff saying, I'm going to be late today, diarrhea. And it's sort of a different kind of bluntness, but it's sort of both sides of the same coin. So that's my observation.
Okay. Well, from my perspective, because we are a language school, so our teachers who are Thai will teach foreigners of different nationalities and different cultures. So, well, in terms of foreigners, then really you can't put them in one single box, because we have people from Europe, from America, from the East, like Japan or China or Korea. They all make different mistakes, or they all make different blunders. But for Thai people, well, for example, in the classroom environment, teachers, they have a more prestige than, I would say, teachers in the Western countries, whereas in our classroom environment with the people from every country and a Thai teacher, sometimes our teachers are taken aback by the students not respecting them the way that they respected their teachers at school. So, for example, it's very, in our classrooms, it's actually very common that a student would challenge the teacher's knowledge of something, or would ask uncomfortable questions about Thailand or Thai culture. And I think, well, basically, the students can ask the same question, except the essence of the questions can be asked in classroom, but you just need to word them like properly and make sure it's not too blunt, it's not too direct, and well, on the other hand, well, the teachers in language schools like this, they also expect students to basically take their words or the things that they teach them for granted, I suppose. So, what Thai teachers are not used to is being corrected, being challenged, and I think that's the mistake that Thai people make or Thai teachers make. I can't really talk about the mistakes that students make because it's going to take too long. So
I've just been given the signal to start wrapping up, so if I could just get a quick response from everyone else.
Mine is just quite simple, that we both make general stereotypes when we first interact with each other. I remember my first week in when I was working at Pfizer, nobody would talk to me because they didn't invite me out for lunch, they didn't want to talk to me at all, and I just felt very lonely. And I think that we all do that, if we're going into a new job, a new role, we kind of just put people in boxes, and we should just be a little bit more open, and that's for both sets of cultures.
Yeah, I think what happens a lot is Thai people misread foreigners' emotions, the way they express their emotions through their facial expressions or their body language, and vice versa. Because a lot of times what happens when a conflict does arise, Thai people tend to smile a lot, and we get like completely nuts. Why are you smiling? For something, maybe you had an accident. Why are people smiling? And, instead of showing that you're angry. So to think about that, I think it's for us very important that we are aware of the emotions that we actually portray, that will come out of us. Because a lot of times Thai people try to read into things. They're trying to read in between the lines. What is he actually meaning? What does he mean by saying that? They're looking at our faces. So I think it's very important for us to keep check of our emotions, that we know what we are showing. And that we maybe sometimes also want to tell people our intentions, why we're saying something. So that people don't have to read in between the lines. And just keep your facial expressions in check, and smile.
Yeah, I was going to say more or less the same. And it works for both sides. Getting angry. So the biggest mistake that non-Thai make is get angry. And the biggest mistake that Thai make is to think that anger is personal. It's not. It's professional. There's an issue that needs to be solved. I'm angry because it hasn't been solved. 2 minutes later, I've completely forgotten about it. I really don't care. So anger, control the anger, preferably no anger. But if it does happen, don't take it personal, because it isn't. It really is not personal at all.
So thank you everyone for coming here and for your questions. I'll hand it back over to our wonderful MC.
Thank you very much. Please